Good afternoon and welcome to Nature's Returns Investing in Ecosystem Services, a webinar speaker series hosted by the Yale Center for Business and Environment. My name is Karina Mahong and I will be your host for this afternoon's presentation titled Bright Spots for Resource Mobilization, Regional Initiatives. The Yale Center for Business and the Environment, CBE, is pleased to announce the continuation of Nature's Returns, a webinar series that addresses the growing importance of ecosystem service evaluation and investment. Each presentation is recorded and available on the Yale iTunes U channel. In today's webinar, we will explore two regional initiatives, the Micronesia Challenge and the Caribbean Challenge Initiative, regional models for leveraging large-scale public and private sector commitments towards biodiversity protection and island resilience. Kostka and Batista, who are speakers today, will highlight the enabling factors that support the regional trust as financial vehicles to attract and provide long-term sustainable funding for biodiversity conservation. They will also detail how countries within their respective regions have capitalized on their natural resources to generate revenue for the trust funds. Yabanex Batista is the Chief Executive Officer of the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, a Caribbean regional endowment fund whose objective is to support activities that contribute to the conservation, protection, and maintenance of biodiversity within the national protected areas systems or any other areas of environmental significance of its participating countries. Willie Kostka is the co-founder of the Micronesia Conservation Trust, in which he currently serves as executive director. William is currently involved in the implementation of the Micronesia Challenge Initiative, a common commitment by the countries and territories of Micronesia to a comprehensive system of resilient protected areas networks. This regional partnership has supported work at approximately 150 sites across the region and raised more than $30 million for conservation work across Micronesia. Finally, we would like to remind our listeners that we welcome any questions you might have, and we will direct them to our speakers at the conclusion of the talk. You can type questions directly into the GoToMeeting chat window. And with that, we welcome Yabanex Batista and Willie Kostka to Nature's Returns. We will start off with Yabanex.
Thank you very much, Karina, and NCTF for the opportunity to participate in this webinar. And also welcome to all of the participants that are here today. I hope you can all see my presentation. Is it showing correctly, Karina?
Yes, we can see it. You can go ahead, Yaba.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So again, thank you very much, everyone. It's really a true pleasure to be here with you today in this webinar. It's amazing what technology can do. And today I will share with you the experience of the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund as a financial mechanism, as a sustainable financial mechanism for the Caribbean Challenge Initiative. And I also want to share with you that in fact the Caribbean Challenge Initiative and the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund are sister initiatives and institutions of the Micronesia Challenge and the Micronesia Conservation Trust, which we'll talk about. And we, in our region in the Caribbean, we were very much inspired by what happened in Micronesia before our time. So it's really a pleasure to be sharing the stage today with Willie. In my presentation today, I will focus on two main areas. I'll talk to you briefly about what is the CBF, its objectives, and what is the Caribbean Challenge Initiative and how the CBF and the CCI are related. And then on the second part, as this is very much about resources mobilization, the objective of the webinar, I will talk more about the CBF, how we are structured as a fund, how the flow of resources work, and I'll also give you a little bit of information about our current status in terms of financing, fundraising, and resources mobilization. As mentioned already briefly by Karina, the CBF is a regional endowment fund, and our objective is to be a sustainable source of funding that would support conservation for the protected area systems and other areas of environmental significance of the CBF participating countries. In a little bit, I'll explain who exactly we support. But as you can see in our mission statement or purpose statement, we have a very broad objective that would allow us to finance projects in different areas related to environment conservation, being terrestrial, marine conservation, but also things related to sustainable fisheries, to climate change adaptation and mitigation, related to sustainable tourism and natural resource management. And the definition of our purpose in this broad scale was done in purpose because there are different priorities in different countries that we support. And we wanted to make sure we could provide the support that everyone needed. Besides our formal objective, the CBF also aims to assist countries in general to achieve the commitments that they have adhered to in the Convention on Biological Diversity. As some of you may know, countries have signed up to the CBD, and there are targets to be achieved in terms of creation of protected areas and how these protected areas should be managed. And the CBD commitments also talk about resources mobilization for at the national level and at the regional level. And the CBD sees itself as a mechanism that also helps to attract those resources, but also make sure that the commitments are fulfilled. Besides the CBD commitments, the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund also aims to help the countries that have voluntarily adhered to the Caribbean Challenge Initiative to fulfill those commitments. The CCI commitments, or Caribbean Challenge Initiative commitments, are all around marine resources protection and conservation. And I'll talk a little bit more in a little while about the Caribbean Challenge Initiative. Besides CBD and CCI, we also aim to support countries in achieving commitments under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, in particular in topics related to how to use natural solutions for mitigation and adaptation to climate change. And last but not least, as many of you probably also know, there is a huge conservation finance gap all around the world. And this basically means that we don't have enough resources at disposal, available to really finance conservation properly in most countries around the world. And this is quite a critical area for small island developing states, not only in the Caribbean, but also in the Indian Ocean and in the Pacific. And our countries normally have huge financial gaps in terms of conservation. And the CBF aims to be a mechanism that will help and assist countries in closing that financial gap. Besides all of those overall objectives, we also hope that by establishing what we call a sustainable finance architecture for the Caribbean, which is composed of the CBF plus also sister trust funds at the national level, which we will support, we hope that we will increase the profile of environment, as environment is often overlooked in our region, to also increase the resources, as I mentioned before, available for conservation, as there are very few overall, and also increase the priority for environment politically and in reality for society in general. Often environment ministries are the least funded ministries in our countries, and in terms of political priorities, environment normally takes one of the last positions as well. But for our islands, the environment is critical because our economies, our tourism industries often depend from those very same natural resources. So the idea is that this sustainable finance architecture will help provide the resources for better managing those resources that support our national economies, and also increase the voice of environment in the region. A little bit more about the Caribbean Challenge Initiative. The Caribbean Challenge Initiative was launched at the CBD Conference of the Parties in 2008 in Bonn, Germany. It was launched by 4 governments: Bahamas, Grenada, the Dominican Republic, and Jamaica. And this initiative basically has established 2 main goals, and those are the effective protection and conservation of 20% of the near-shore marine ecosystems by 2020 of those countries that align to this initiative, and also creating, as I mentioned before, the sustainable finance architecture for conservation in the region. This sustainable finance architecture is composed of 2 key layers. The first one is a regional layer, which is represented by the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, which is the fund I represent. And the other layer, the second layer, is the national level trust funds that are currently being established in the 8 participating countries of the CBF. By creating these institutions and establishing these institutions that didn't exist before in our countries, we hope, as I've mentioned before, to increase the flow of resources for conservation in the region and help the countries achieve the 20 by 20 target of the CCI, the Caribbean Challenge Initiative, as well as other environmental objectives. How was the Caribbean, how did the Caribbean Challenge Initiative originated? Well, even before 2008, its official launch, governments already have started to realize that the economies of the Caribbean islands depends very much on the natural resources that we have, our coral reefs, our beaches, our mangroves, our fisheries, and that is for tourism industry, for local livelihoods, for everything. It creates a lot of direct and indirect employment, and governments have increasingly paid more attention to this. So that was a great, the first and most important impetus for the governments to come together and join in the Caribbean Challenge Initiative, because they know they depend on this. Then besides that, it was not only the political will that was necessary, you also needed partners to come to the table to help the countries financially to start the process. So a number of donors, which you will see later, and partners have come to the table, and because the countries have committed to reaching those goals that I explained before, the partners and the donors have decided that they want to assist the countries and help the countries achieve those goals, because they have shown that they have political will to do so. So those are 2 of the key ingredients in the genesis of the Caribbean Challenge Initiative and the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. In this next slide, you see a quick diagram, a map of all the countries that are part of the Caribbean Challenge Initiative and the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. There's no direct correlation. It's not a one-to-one correlation, but in the red circle, you see the CCI countries, and the yellow stars are the countries that will benefit from the CBF. There are some observer countries or countries that want to join the CBF, and those are Puerto Rico and British Virgin Islands, which you see in the empty yellow stars. The CCI commitments were reaffirmed during a summit of political and business leaders that took place in May 2013. This summit took place in the British Virgin Islands and brought together 8 environment ministers from the region, which you see now in your screen. And these leaders signed the Leaders' Declaration, which reaffirmed the 2 goals that I mentioned before, the 20 by 20 target and the creation of the sustainable finance architecture. Then there were also 15 companies that signed the corporate compact, which is a compact that in which these companies commit themselves to also provide resources to help the countries achieve the targets on around the CCI, the Caribbean Challenge Initiative, and also improve their social and environmental corporate responsibility in the. And third, there were about 30 partners that also attended the summit and committed around $75 million in projects that were currently being implemented or that were going to be coming online, and that were also aligned, those projects, to achieving the goals of the Caribbean Challenge Initiative. And those partners included bilateral organizations. So by bilateral organizations, I mean government aid from other countries like Germany, the UK, Italy, also from multilateral institutions like the European Commission and the World Bank, the GEF, and UNEP, the United Nations Environment Program and Development Program, and also from NGOs and foundations like the Nature Conservancy and Oak Foundation. Now the Caribbean Challenge Initiative has started its second phase after that summit, and you see in your screens what that second phase is going to entail. Now we are particularly advancing a lot on the last bullet point, which is achieving and creating that sustainable finance architecture, and that's what I'm going to focus on in the rest of my presentation. So the CBF, how does it work? In this screen, you see a lot of boxes, and I may spend a minute here or so explaining our whole organization and structure of funds. But in the middle, you see a box that represents the CBF, and let's say more or less our bank account and our institution at the same time, our secretariat. On the top, you see the donations coming from the donors. Our current donors are the German Development Bank, the Nature Conservancy, and the Global Environment Facility. This for $42 million to date for our Phase I capitalization. Of those $42 million, 28 have been deposited, and we have already gained income and interest on these $48 million, and our current endowment value is $30 million. To the left of the screen, you see that we are governed by a board of directors. This board of directors is currently composed of the German Development Bank and the Nature Conservancy, and country observers from the 8 countries that are going to benefit from the CBF. You also see the secretariat, that's the office I lead. And then to the right, you see that we have established our basic operations. We have our accountants, our investment managers. We work with our partners, and we have our auditors. Why it's important to mention all of this, particularly the accounting, the auditors, and the investment managers? Because as a financing institution, we are a financing institution. It is very important for our donors and our partners and our recipients to know that we have a very solid basis on which we are investing our resources, and that we have clear rules on accounting and transparency, so that all information is available and very clear to everyone. At the bottom, you see 8 boxes that represent the National Conservation Trust Funds that would benefit from the CBF. And as I mentioned, these trust funds are being established at the moment. And once those trust funds are established, the CBF will basically enter into a contract with those institutions so that they receive support from us. At the same time, when we sign that contract, those trust funds, out of their board membership, their individual board membership, they would be able to select a person that would represent that trust fund in the CBF board. And that's why, to the left, you see a line that connects those 8 boxes to the board of directors of the CBF. So that is a basic explanation and initial explanation, and I'm happy to entertain questions later on this, on how the CBF works and how our governance works. In terms of financing, here you see a lot of numbers in this slide, but it's just to show how we are also organized financially. So we have 8 countries in our books, with 3 donors at the moment. We hope to add more. And each of the countries has a sub-account within our endowment. And different donors provide different amounts of support to those sub-accounts. As you see, about $42 million have been pledged, and in the numbers in parentheses at the bottom, you see the total amount that have been deposited today. In the very, very near future, I'm hoping in the next year, we will be able to have the full deposits for the $42 million in the CBF endowment. Once we have all these resources and once we enter into a contract with the trust funds that we are going to support, the CBF, out of its capital gains, what we generate from interest from our investments, those are the resources that we are going to use to support the trust funds at the national level. So the idea is that for the CBF to be a sustainable mechanism for conservation, we cannot use our capital base. We have to use only the interest that we earn, the income we earn, and that's what we are going to distribute. And that's how we would be building the sustainability aspect financially in this case. Here is a graph in which you see an initial, for the period of September 2013 to August 2014 on how the CBF endowment value has behaved. This is a very short period of time to show how the CBF investments have reacted to our investment strategy and to how markets behave. But in the future, I hope, and maybe in a future webinar, I would be able to give you an update on how the CBF has done financially and how effective our investment strategy has been, and show how the endowment has behaved. Here, I think it's important to also mention that the CBF has an investment strategy which target is to have a 7% return on investment annually. And this return on investment target, we achieved it last year. We hope that we will achieve it in this year as well. And we would be using, we will be using about 5% of those. So 5% of the return on investment of that 7% for making payments to the trust funds, and then the rest, and to support my office, the operations of my office, and then the rest is going to be reinvested in the sub-accounts of each country. One important principle of the CBF is that while we are going to provide assistance to the countries and the national trust funds to help achieve commitments to biodiversity and close the financial gap, the CBF will also later on in the relationship with each trust fund require a one-to-one match, because part of our objective as well is to increase the overall size of the pie for conservation. And I think I'm having a little bit of a technical glitch here. I hope you can still see my screen. I think you can. And this requirement for having a one-to-one match, the idea is that the stakeholders at the country level will create new mechanisms that would direct new money to the national conservation trust funds that will also benefit from the CBF. So again, the idea is to increase the amount of resources that go to conservation. And these options can range from being purely government options in terms of the sustainable finance mechanisms, or being purely private. But the truth is that most likely it's going to be a mix. It's going to be everything that it's in the gray zone. And of course, these options will vary from country to country. How significant is the funding that will be provided by the CBF? So once we have all of our funding deposited in our account, and assuming all the trust funds are established and operational, we will be providing close to $2 million per year to all these trust funds together. And once all the matching mechanisms are established and they fulfill the one-to-one match, we would be generating together about $3.75 million a year. This is quite significant for the countries, particularly because it's going to be in perpetuity. And in some cases, it's going to help close by 10 to 15% the conservation financial gap in each country. We also hope that in the future, the CBF capital will continue to grow, and that we will open other types of funding windows. And also just wanted to briefly say that we do have a number of procedures to declare trust funds at the national level eligible for CBF support, and we're currently working on that. And that we also provide guidance and support to these trust funds in terms of how they should be structured to make sure that they follow internationally recognized standards on how conservation trust funds work. The CBF, for example, is part of the Latin American network Latin America and Caribbean network of conservation trust funds, and our aim is to support the trust funds in the Caribbean as well in making sure that they are sound institutions, both financially but also in terms of their conservation objectives. Last, I'm gonna run quickly as I know time is running is short, but I just want to give you a glimpse into the future of the CBF, and we are currently working on a strategic plan that will take us to 2020. And this plan, basically, the objective would be to provide a vision for the CBF and the role we should play in the region through 2020. And we have about 5 main focus areas. First is establishing a strong operational institutional foot for the CBF, continue to strengthen the relations and engagement with the government and regional actors, designing and establishing new thematic windows for funding. Right now, the CBF has a biodiversity protection and conservation window, which, yes, allows for other kind of supports related to climate change and fisheries. But what we would like to do in the future is to have at least 3 windows that would also specifically, 2 additional windows that would cover specifically climate change and sustainable fisheries. 4, we are looking at expanding the geographic scope of the CBF. A number of countries are interested in joining the CBF. Those are Haiti, Puerto Rico, British Virgin Islands, U.S. Virgin Islands, and Barbados. They have expressed in some way or another an interest in joining the CBF. And then also we need to work very much on a CBF Phase II fundraising strategy. We still have to establish a goal for our fundraising strategy. And last but not least, we are going to be working for the strategic plan as well on establishing and implementing a marketing and communication strategy. And I think with that, I thank you again for your participation, for your attention, and I look forward to your questions towards the end of the seminar. Thank you again, Karina.
Thanks very much, Yaba. Now we're going to direct the talk to Willie Kostka of the Micronesia Conservation Trust. He will talk about his regional initiative and the work within that region. Willie? Let's make sure that we can get Willie on the line. Are you hearing us?
Hello? Hello?
Hi.
Yeah,
Yes.
Can you hear me?
We can. Go right ahead, Willie.
Thank you, Karina. The Micronesia Conservation Trust, which was established in 2002, became part of the Micronesia Challenge Initiative, which was a commitment by the governments of the Federated States of Micronesia, Republic of Palau, Marshall Islands, and the U.S. territories of Guam and CNMI. Basically, the Micronesia Challenge Initiative is to set aside under effective protection 30% of our nearshore marine resources and 20% of our terrestrial resources by 2020. When the leaders made the decision and the commitment to have the Micronesia Challenge, they selected the Micronesia Conservation Trust to be the financing mechanism for the endowment that they sought to establish as part of the Micronesia Challenge Initiative. The idea, and based off of a sustainable financing plan that we worked on, which determined that we would need approximately $56 million in an endowment to support the cap from what was left of the budgets of governments and the local organizations that are working on conservation in Micronesia. And so each of the countries have been working to put funding into the Micronesia Challenge Endowment Fund, which is being managed by the Micronesia Conservation Trust. We at the moment, the endowment is around $18 million. Again, the goal is to raise $56 million for the endowment. In addition to the establishment of the endowment, the countries are also seeking to establish national and local sustainable financing mechanisms. In Palau, they've created a green fee, which is collected from all visitors to Palau at $15 per visitor, and that's bringing in approximately $1.5 million per year to support their protected areas network. The Federated States of Micronesia, Republic of Marshall Islands, Guam, and CNMI are also looking at establishing their own tourism or visitor fees to go into their own national sustainable financing mechanism. But they're also looking at other things such as adding a resource management fee to the tuna fisheries, especially for the FSM and the Marshall Islands, which would again go into their own national financing mechanisms. The seed funding for the endowment came from the Global Environment Facility, and also at $5.1 million. And then both the Nature Conservancy and Conservation International each provided $3 million to the endowment. The endowment is divided by the countries, and the amount that the countries put in, including the commitments that the Global Environment Facility, CI, and TNC put in, makes up each country's total amount. So at the moment, the Republic of Palau's endowment amount is just over $8 million. For the Federated States of Micronesia, is about $5 million. And for the Republic of the Marshall Islands, about $4 million. The earnings from those at 5% will be going out to the countries to help support the protected area networks in each of those countries. In addition to the larger regional endowment and the national financing mechanisms that they're coming up with, we've also sought to work with individual sites to or individual islands to create other sustainable financing mechanisms. For example, in the state of Kushai in the Federated States of Micronesia, we've started the first conservation easement in the Pacific with a small $520,000 endowment for the 10 landowners on the island of Kushai for a special forest of the remaining terminalia forest in that state. And the dividends from the endowment are then provided to the landowners in return for giving up development rights for their land. Other things such as revolving funds that we're also starting to help farmers establish conservation work in their own areas. We've also been working on the first payment for ecosystem services mechanism in the island of Pohnpei to have a water fund that would provide funding to those landowners who own the areas around our main headwaters that supply water to over 60% of the island's um, population. The idea is to tack on half a cent per 1,000 gallons, and that would generate approximately $400,000 on an annual basis, which would be used for managing the forest around the areas that provide water to, again, 60% of the population of Pohnpei. So those are the types of financing mechanisms that we're working on. We have the larger regional endowment, which the Micronesia Conservation Trust is managing, and then we have national mechanisms that are that the countries themselves have put in place, and then we also have those local financing mechanisms that are directed at specific sites or at the state level. The way that the Micronesia Challenge Endowment Fund is going to operate is that the earnings at no more than 5% would be provided to the financing mechanism, the national financing mechanisms, which are being called the Protected Areas Network Funds, will receive the interest that are made on the endowment, and they will then distribute those funds to the sites, to the protected areas in each national and territorial area. So that's where we are. I'm going to stop here and allow for some questions from our moderators. Thank you.
Thank you, Willie. As a reminder, we encourage our viewers to submit questions in the chat section, and we will be directing those towards the speakers. But just to start the discussion off, both Yaba and Willie, please feel free to answer. How have the regional trust funds been able to encourage both government and private sector investment in nature to generate returns for conservations? And what have been the limitations of this particular structure in achieving this particular goal?
Go ahead, Willie.
Thank you. Thank you, Karina. For the Micronesia region, we've really struggled to have private input into the endowments. We don't have any private company input. We've worked with the governments and donor organizations to provide the funding that goes into the endowments. Unfortunately for us, we still haven't cracked the or have the ability to be able to entice or bring in private sector investment into the endowment. Now, with the governments, the way that it's worked is when we're able to, for example, get commitments from Conservation International, the Nature Conservancy, and the Global Environment Facility, and requiring a one-to-one match from the government. That's allowed or has been a good way to get governments to put up their own funds into the endowment. Without those commitments from donors outside, it will be very difficult for the countries themselves to meet the requirements or the needs as identified in the Sustainable Financing Plan. So it works both ways. We have, when we get interest from international donor organizations, they're able to get our local governments or national governments to get excited about providing funding because they know it will be matched, as well as when the governments themselves are able to put in money, then that gives the international donors the peace of mind and security that they would their money is going into an endowment that the governments care about. So it works both ways. Thank you.
Karina, in the case of the Caribbean, in terms of the private sector, we do have a much wider spectrum of companies, different private sector institutions that are engaged in the region. We have a lot of tourism, cargo shipments, et cetera, et cetera. But we also have some difficulties in tapping into this sector for a few reasons. First, tourism vendors or companies, hotels, all those actors, they want to try to provide the cheapest product as possible, often to the tourists, and they feel that by engaging in an initiative like this and providing resources, that may make their product more expensive. Luckily, we do see a lot of actors that are a lot more progressive and forward-looking, and they understand that their product depends on a good natural resource base. So we are trying in the Caribbean to start working with those actors, and I think a good initial step was the corporate compact that was signed at the Caribbean Challenge Initiative Summit. But there's still a long way to go. Engaging with airlines and cruise ships and restaurants and hotels, it's complex because they are big companies, and it is a dialogue that has to take a long time to make sure that all parties and stakeholders feel comfortable with what is being done, and that's just the nature of how things like this go. So it takes a lot of time and effort, but hopefully we will achieve that. In terms of the governments, I think, like Willie was saying, the government commitment is quite important. And as I mentioned in my presentation, and Willie mentioned in his, the fact that both in the Micronesia Challenge and the Caribbean Challenge, the governments make commitments to conservation that actually help to bring donors to the table. Without those commitments, without that political will, the GEF, nor TNC, nor the German Development Bank, in the case of the Caribbean, would have come to the table. And it is important to keep that commitment from the countries in place. And sometimes it's difficult to do that because we go through election cycles and presidents or prime ministers change. And we need to keep working with the new leadership in different countries to make sure that those commitments are kept. So it is always just having the signature of a leader's declaration in a summit is not enough. It is a job that we have to keep doing every day. And as I also mentioned, and Willie mentioned also in his remarks just now, establishing the sustainable finance mechanisms at the national level also requires not only engagement with the private sector, but also engagement with the public sector, and to create those partnerships. So it is an ongoing job and a challenging one, and we all try to make it rewarding. It's not easy. Maybe in the presentations it sounds easy, but it's quite challenging sometimes.
Great. Thank you for your responses, Willie and Yaba. We have a question from an audience member. The question is, can you address how these two initiatives have collaborated and shared ideas? Are there other similar efforts in other regions? Maybe we can have Willie start with this one.
Thank you, Karina. Well, when we started the Micronesia Challenge, just after a few years or a couple of years of trying to implement the Micronesia Challenge, we were invited by the Nature Conservancy to talk to the folks in the Caribbean about this initiative, and that actually helped to spur the Caribbean Challenge. And today we have the Western Indian Ocean Challenge, which was also spurred by the Micronesia Challenge and the Caribbean Challenge, and the Coral Triangle Initiative as well. But in terms of collaboration with the other initiatives, we've been working through the Global Island Partnership in getting, these initiatives moving forward and learning from each other with the lessons that we're learning in each of the initiatives. We've been able to get a lot of support from our partners in the Global Environment Facility, and that support comes to all the initiatives, and the lessons learned are being shared with all the organizations that are part of these initiatives. In several instances where there have been international meetings or forums, we've joined with the other initiatives, the other challenges, and we've held presentations together, and from those we also learn from each other. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Willie. We have a specific question directed to Yaba. The question is, how can a country become a new member of the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, and what is the approximate timeline for this process? Also, Willie, if you'd like, you can probably address this question for the Micronesia Conservation Trust once Yaba has provided his response.
Thank you, Karina, and that's actually a really excellent question. Basically, for a country to become part of the CBF, to receive support from the CBF, we need two key ingredients. The first one is that we need an interest from that country, the stakeholders in that country. Often the initial interest comes from the government, particularly the Ministry of Finance and or the Ministry of Environment. And we start a process of an informal dialogue to discuss what is the CBF, how is it that the country understands the workings of the CBF, and to make sure that we are all on the same page. At the same time, the funding that we currently have in the CBF from the donors, it's earmarked for the current 8 countries that participate in the CBF. So if another country is going to join the CBF, I also need to work together with the country in getting new donors that would support that particular country, because I cannot use the monies that I have earmarked for other countries for a new country. So it's something, this is a discussion that we are hoping to start having with some of the 4 to 5 countries that are interested in joining the CBF in the near future. And my hope is that since we are doing this initial batch of countries, 8 countries are hopefully in the next year and a half, we will formalize the relationship with all these 8 trust funds in the 8 participating countries. Once we do that, we will have a lot of know-how, and I hope that in a period of a year to 2, I would say probably 2 years to 3 years, we can complete the whole process. That sounds like a long time, but when you look at how these initiatives and how these institutions need to be established, 2 to 3 years is actually not that long. The Caribbean Challenge Initiative and the CBF, those conversations on creating the CBF and the CCI started in 2006. We're in 2014 now. So working on all this takes a long time, and you have to be persistent. So my hope is that we will have a lot of lessons learned and ways on how to expedite the process in the future so that more countries can join. And I hope I answered the question, Karina and whoever made it. Thank you.
Yes, yeah. Thank you, Yaba. Willie?
Yeah, for Micronesia, the countries are already part of the Micronesia Challenge. It's just a matter of working with them to develop their endowments and their financing and their national financing mechanisms. So, but in terms of how countries are going to be receiving the earnings from their endowments from from MCT, we are working with them to develop financing mechanisms at the national level that can receive and disperse these funds, and those are most likely going to be the protected area network funds in each country. And we're also working with them to develop what we're calling country program strategies, which identify, what are the types of activities and programs that funds can go towards, and what activities and programs that the fund cannot go towards. So that's what we're currently working on.
Karina,
Great,
if I can
thank
just
you.
add quickly.
So sure, go right ahead.
Quickly to my answer, and that is that the idea is that we would also have a roadmap together. So we would work on establishing a roadmap with that country, so that we establish the steps and the key milestones to make sure that we can achieve the goal of that country being able to become a CBF participating country.
We have one more question from an audience member, and then we will probably wrap up the webinar. So the question is, the CBD's resource mobilization is also about putting biodiversity high on the national agenda. In other words, they seek to integrate biodiversity as a priority for sectoral policies. Do the presented models help achieve this systematic change and have an impact on the national development plans? And when I say CBD, for those online, they are referring to the Convention on Biological Diversity. So we could probably start with you, Yaba.
Okay. Thank you, Karina, and thank you for that question. It is an excellent question. I think this year is also particularly important for that topic, as we are soon approaching the UN General Assembly, where the Sustainable Development Goals are going to be discussed. And then right after that, we have the climate change meeting in Paris. And often in these fora, the discussion also includes how biodiversity is integrated into sustainable development and climate change, et cetera, et cetera. So the short answer is yes, and it is definitely the intent of the CCI, the Caribbean Challenge Initiative, and the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund as a financial mechanism for the CCI to help raise the voice of biodiversity in the development agenda of our countries. As I mentioned, our economies depend very much on that natural resource base. And also, what we are seeing in the process of the establishment of the national conservation trust funds in each of the 8 participating countries of the CBF is that many of those trust funds are going to go beyond pure biodiversity conservation. They want to make sure that these funds can address issues related to sustainable development, including climate change, land degradation. So many countries are thinking along these lines, and that is also going to help raise the voice of conservation and biodiversity in the development agenda. And I think that is a very positive sign, because often in our countries, there are very few fora through which the environment can raise its voice, and the idea is that these national conservation trust funds will be strong institutions that will be a flag they would be able to raise the biodiversity flag, but also insert that discourse and that dialogue within the broader development scope. So that's definitely the aim that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your response. Willie?
Thank you, Karina. For the Micronesian countries, they've developed their sustainable development goals, and those goals at the national levels do include biodiversity as part of those sustainable development goals. and climate change. And so, yes, they are very important for the countries. The countries have identified tourism, fisheries, and aquaculture. Aquaculture as part of their development goals for the coming years, and in all those three, it requires working on mainstreaming biodiversity conservation into national plans, and so that's where we are today. Some of the countries have already started those plans, are moving forward, and we're part of it as the financing mechanism for the Micronesia Challenge.
Great, thank you for your response. And with that, we will conclude our talk on bright spots for resource mobilization, regional initiatives. We would like to thank Yabanex Batista and Willie Kostka for joining us this afternoon. If you would like to view a recording of this webinar, please visit the Yale Center for Business and the Environment website or access the recording through the Yale iTunes University podcast series. This is Karina Mahong from the Yale Center for Business and the Environment saying so long from New Haven, Connecticut. Thank you for joining us.